My name's Leah, and I'm going to talk about where all the frogs are and why we should care about where they are and what they can teach us about our environments. What are frogs? Frogs can come in all shapes, colors, and sizes, as seen with the Goliath frog over here on the left, which is the largest frog in the world. And compare that to the microhyla on the right, which is actually the smallest frog in the world. Frogs are amphibians, so that means that their larvae usually breathe through gills and require water to survive, and the adults breathe through lungs and are mostly found on land. You can see the life cycle to the right, where the frog starts out as eggs in the water and then slowly develops into a tadpole, which then metamorphoses into a frog that lives mostly on the land. But another important characteristic of amphibians is that they actually breathe through their skin and absorb a lot of important nutrients through their skin. But frogs aren't the only type of amphibians. There are actually over 7,000 species of amphibians around the world. There are also toads, which are classified by their bumpier skin and shorter hips, which allow them to make small hops rather than large jumps like frogs. And frogs and toads together make up just over 6,000 of the 7,000 species. There are also salamanders, which make up over 600 species of amphibians. And finally, there are the caecilians, which make up just over 200 species, and they spend most of their time underground. There's a large biodiversity of frogs and toads all over the world, and they're found on every continent except for Antarctica. If you remember their life cycle, they actually need water to breed. So you're going to find them in most habitats with water. Tanzania has at least 206 species of amphibians, including 200 species of frogs and toads and 6 species of caecilians. So on the left, we have a peacock frog, and on the right, we have the Kahansi spray toad. And these are both really cool looking species, and they're actually both endangered. Some of the frogs in Anishiva include the Muller's clawed frog, as you can see on the left, and the rocket frog, as you can see on the right. There's also the natal puddle frog, as well as the foam nest frog. We also have the banded rubber frog. So how do you go about finding a frog? Well, you can follow their calls. Frogs make loud calls to call to mates or sometimes even defend their territory. If you listen to this clip, you can hear a whole chorus of several different species of frogs. So try to figure out how many different frogs there are that are calling in here. What do you think the frogs are telling us? Well, the frogs can actually tell us a lot about the health of our environment. Frogs are bioindicators, meaning that they require healthy land and water to survive, so their presence can tell us how healthy the environment is. Really permeable skin can actually make them very susceptible to these changes on water and land. Pollution on the land and in the water can have harmful effects on frogs, as seen with this deformed frog on the left. It can even cause mass die-offs in populations, as seen on the right. But in addition to things like pollution, we're seeing frog declines from habitat loss and pesticides and fertilizers. We're also seeing an invisible killer. This invisible killer is called Chytrid fungus, or Batrachochytrium dendrobatidis. It's thought that this fungus is now responsible for causing extinctions and declines in a third of all amphibian species around the world. Chytrid has aquatic zoospores that swim through the water and end up burrowing into the amphibian skin. These spores offset nutrient balance in that permeable skin that's absorbing nutrients. Frogs will eventually go under cardiac arrest, which doesn't necessarily have symptoms if you find a dead frog in the field. So where did it come from? It actually originated on the Korean peninsula and spread around the same time that the international amphibian pet trade started to establish. And this frog on the right, the African clawed frog, is a pretty popular frog in the pet trade and is actually tolerant to the fungus, so it can spread it to other species. How do we even detect it if we can't see it with our naked eye? Well, we actually detect the Chytrid fungus DNA in amphibian skin swabs, and through a process called quantitative polymerase chain reaction, or qPCR, in a lab. Although almost 800 amphibians from 61 species have been tested for chytrid fungus infections in Tanzania, those were only from 2 regions in southern and eastern Tanzania. So that might seem like a pretty impressive number, but we actually don't know a lot about its distribution in Tanzania because we've only sampled from 2 small sites. So is chytrid fungus in Enashiva? Well, actually, no one has reportedly tested amphibians for chytrid fungus in Enashiva or in northern Tanzania. So we know it's close, and we know the species that are around could potentially have it. Why should we care about chytrid fungus detection? Well, not all amphibian species are susceptible to chytrid fungus, so community structures can influence disease outbreaks. And some species can be wiped out in less than a week of exposure, while others can be tolerant and carry or spread the fungus, like the African clawed frog that I talked about before. And some species are also completely resistant to infection and don't carry or spread the fungus. But chytrid fungus is still spreading, so it's important to monitor the distribution in order to identify how and when it spreads to new areas. So what can you do? Well, we know that frogs are threatened by a lot more than just chytrid fungus, so you could try to conserve water and use less lawn pesticides and fertilizers. And if you ever find any dead amphibians, let your local wildlife control know. You should also be sure to disinfect any waders, nets, boots, and other aquatic gear before traveling to new ponds. I usually use a 1 in 10 mixture of bleach to water, or I let them dry in the sun for 5 days. You can also avoid buying amphibians as pets, but if you do own an amphibian, make sure that you disinfect that wastewater with a bleach to water mixture before dumping it out. And when you see amphibians in the wild, leave them where you find them, and don't stock your ponds with amphibians. Why should we be caring about amphibians? Amphibians are bioindicators, and their presence indicates ecosystem health. Their thin, moist skin that helps them breathe and absorb nutrients from their environment means that they require clean water and healthy land habitat. Amphibians provide important insect control. They eat bugs like mosquitoes, which can carry harmful diseases to humans. And in addition to that insect control, just look at these guys. They're so diverse and such neat creatures. I mean, how many other animals can actually call to us and tell us about our environment?